Good evening, and welcome to CITI Media Reporter. I'm Howard Homonoff, and thank you for joining us tonight. My guest is Seth Rogin, the Chief Revenue Officer for Mashable.com. Seth, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So I feel like Mashable is one of those things that everybody knows Mashable, but I'm not sure everybody knows Mashable.
Right.
So talk a little bit about not just what it looks like, but what is Mashable? What are you guys trying to do?
Well, I think, first of all, really thank you very much for having me. I think in order to understand Mashable, you have to understand its founder first, right? Pete Cashmore is my boss. He's the CEO and founder. And he started the company when he was 19 years old in Scotland. He was a young man. He was in his bedroom, and he was really in a very small rural town. And he realized that suddenly, one day, locked in his room, he could communicate with the entire world. It was a really exciting thing because there was no such thing as Twitter. There was no such thing as Instagram. Facebook was something that I think was on 2 college campuses, this one not being one of them. Yeah. And suddenly this kid in basically the middle of the tiniest of towns can speak to people all over the planet. And he realized something very special was happening, and so he decided to document that. And in doing so, an audience grew organically for him. People all over the world, particularly young people, started following him to understand, because they were as eager to understand what was happening in social media as he was. And that, to me, is the core, really, of Mashable, because even today, it's about understanding, right? And now it's grown, obviously, in huge ways. So Mashable now has 40 million uniques coming to us a month, unique readers, more than 20 million social followers, and growing every single month, which is an exciting time. But it's still all about understanding, except now it's about viewing the entire world through the lens of the web, through the lens of social media. So, you know, if you think of it in a way, technology has come to the world, but now we're in this moment where the world has come to technology. And Mashable is at the fulcrum. And so we are the way that these 40 million people are understanding the world in a different way.
And talk about who those 40 million are, in a sense, right? I mean, you sell these people, right? You're the Chief Revenue Officer, but what kind of, if there is what are some of their key characteristics that draw them to Mashable, keep them coming back?
Well, when you have an audience of that scale, it's pretty demographically diverse, right?
Sure.
40 million people, you're not going to have just one story. What they are is generally young. Most of our audience, the vast majority of our audience, is the age 44 and below. They're generally split almost exactly half male-female. They are half in the US and half throughout the rest of the world, and that's where we're expanding in a very big way. Both US and, of course, around the planet. And you'll see even more of that, I believe, coming soon. More than anything, what I think defines them as an audience is their level of interest, their level of wanting to understand what's new, what's next. That's what they come to us for. And perhaps the defining characteristic is they are hyper-sharers. They're the people who come to Mashable because they want to share our content. They are fishing where the fish are, for lack of a better phrase, if you want to get something shared.
So, you know, there are so many places to go, so many things to do, so many destinations in online world. It's not like, you know, you're selling one of three television networks and you got to be in those 3. They're all, you know, there's so many options. How does Mashable, you know, Internet One, I think the term might have been special sauce, but what is it that makes Mashable stand out? How do you distinguish yourself in this sea of so many places where people can choose to spend their time and share their content?
Sure. I mean, the content stands out first. The content is what draws people in. And in fact, the largest department of people within Mashable is its newsroom itself. Right? We are about creating content that people want to share. And we're about being on the cutting edge of what is new and next. And the reason why people are coming to us is that they want to be the first ones to share a piece of content. That's really important, right? Being right is first, but being first is a close second. And so you always want to be out ahead of the rest of social media, because if you're sharing something by the time it's trending, let's say, that means you're really following, right? All of these influential people have made a trend, and now I'm going to be number 1,000,006 who's going to follow and share that thing. I'm not exactly showing my friends that I'm cutting edge. I'm not showing them that I'm giving them value in following me. I want to be one of the first to share. And Mashable readers want to be those people, and that's why they're coming to us. That's why we build technology around that, and it's why our content is always out ahead.
And talk a little bit about your content people. I mean, I know you've drawn from the New York Times, among other places. who are your content people inside of Mashable, and what are they trying to do?
Sure. So it's a pretty diverse group as well,
Yeah.
right? In many ways, if you walk through the Mashable newsroom, it looks a lot like our audience. It's millennials writing for millennials. At the very top of our organization is Jim Roberts, who we're truly honored to have running Mashable's newsroom as our editor-in-chief and chief content officer. Jim was one of the founding editors of NewYorkTimes.com. I'm also a New York Times alum, and so it was great to have him join us as well. Jim was one of the leaders of the coverage at the New York Times of things like the Bush v. Gore election in 2000 and the Katrina floods. And so it's more important than ever to have someone of that caliber saying that the first place he wants to break news is on Mashable. And of course, there are other journalists who want to work for someone like Jim and like a brand like Mashable. And so it's been a very exciting time. And so what we're seeing are some of the best in the business from other places are leaving their former roles to come to Mashable. So one of the top editors of the Inside Hollywood site called The Wrap, Josh Dickey, left there to become our top Hollywood editor, our top entertainment editor. Jessica Ploutz, who was an editor at The Skift, which is a very top travel site, left there to become our top travel editor. And we're seeing that across a number of different verticals.
Now, you, of course, came, as you mentioned, from the New York Times. And
I did.
Talk a little bit about that. Maybe start with culture. You know, going from the gray lady. You know, there isn't a bigger name in the world in terms of august news. I don't think. Maybe the Times of London. I'm not sure, but
I'd debate you on that.
Yeah, I'm sure you would. You'd probably win. But what has that shift been like for you? And you know, others obviously you're drawing from a lot of other similar places. But what's it been like for you?
Well, I mean, number one, I think we should all be rooting for the New York Times. The world needs a New York Times. We need giant newsrooms who are funded well to cover the entire world and to speak the truth. And I think in many ways what Mashable is creating is the newsroom of the future. I love the time that I had at the Times. I think it was one of the greatest universities I could ever attend. And so I'm deeply proud of the work that we did there. And more important to me than anything else is a phrase I carry throughout my career that I call mission-based media, meaning that I don't just want to go out and sell ads. If I did, I'd work for TMZ, right? But to me, it's more important that what I'm doing as someone in the revenue role is actually supporting noble journalism. It's actually supporting telling the truth. I feel as though I will look back at the end of my career and be very proud of the fact that I wasn't just out there selling something. I was out there selling something meaningful. And Mashable's journalism has very much been that for me. I think the New York Times journalism is, of course, on that parallel. But there are many heroic journalists at Mashable that are now being quoted by major media sources because we're able to be very nimble, right? We don't have a legacy culture of a century and a half to weigh us down. And we're able to define what the news organization of the future should be. That's a great and exhilarating freedom to have.
So can institutions like the Times, are they going to survive? Are they going to
Let's
be,
hope so.
you know, I mean, what do they have to do? I mean, that's not your job anymore, but, you know, you've had that perspective for a number of years of being in that, you know, the traditional legacy news brand, information brand business. What do those institutions need to do? Do they need to do something like what you're doing? What do they need to do to, you know, to be relevant and survive, you know, the next 100 years?
Yeah, I'm not going to be so bold as to forecast or give a prescription for the New York Times. However, what I would say is what I think is serving us very well is the ability to be nimble and building that into your culture. I think at the moment that you are lost in checking with too many people before a decision is made, that can be a cultural anchor that no organization needs at this point. The best thing that Pete Cashmore taught me when I came on was that he doesn't believe in big committees. He believes in finding people he really trusts and then giving them the freedom and the power to make decisions and make us move forward. And in doing that, in the last 16 to 18 months, our business has grown dramatically based on Pete's hiring structure and the culture that Pete has created. And that's a very different culture. At the same time, I think the whole world needs to root for anyone who's out there telling truth in journalism. Probably the biggest danger that we have to democracy in many ways is that there are people out there right now representing journalism, representing themselves as journalists when they're really not. They're really selling opinions or even corporate opinions as individual journalists.
And how do you have people? I mean, you know, the horrible stories of ISIS and reporters whose lives are in danger around the world. I mean, is that part of what your content folks have to deal with as well as people that are affiliated with you around the world and protecting them?
Any journalist who is going to go into a dangerous area is in danger. Yeah. Thankfully, we haven't faced the same kinds of abductions that some of the other news organizations have faced, but that's not to say that our journalists haven't been in danger in a number of situations. What I think is key is that we have both the coordination and the power to make sure that we protect our journalists and that the public respond when journalists are endangered, because we need those journalists out there in the market space regardless of what brand or company they're working for.
I want to pick up one of the things you talked about is the growth going on there within Mashable. And just about a year ago, a bit less than a year ago, you raised a significant amount of money, or at least significant to me. I mean, it might not be to Google, but I think it was 13 million.
I don't live on the scale of significance to Google.
So that's right. It doesn't do any of us.
Good luck with that. Yes.
But what is it that Mashable wanted to? What are they doing with that infusion of funds, and how is it transforming what the organization is or what you're doing?
Right. So Mashable took on its first ever round of funding in January of this year. That's an unusual thing when you think of the fact that Mashable has been around now for about 8 years. So when you have an organization of that age in the startup world, generally they've done many rounds by this point. We did not. Mashable has been a successful business every year that it's existed. We continue to be so. However, we saw the opportunity with a little bit of funding to come in, and I'm not drawing scale references,
right.
But in reference to, say, some of the rounds that other big companies have taken, other startups, we saw the ability to take on that funding and really light the fuse on the business. And we had a very clear business plan that's paying off right now. Obviously, I'm not at liberty to reveal our year-end results, but I will say...
We were hoping to break a little loose here. I don't know.
But I will say everyone will be pleased. Okay. And we're not public, so I can say things like that. But we're very proud of the growth that we continue to build. And having that funding helped us to do the hiring and growth that we needed to do in a number of areas, both in terms of news investment, business side investment, communications investment. I think that we would have grown without it, but we would not have grown as rapidly as we have.
I'm interested in how the advertising brand world is perceiving you, Mashable, working with you. You're the chief revenue officer, right?
Yes.
We're a Columbia Business School. A lot of people would love to have that title someday in their career. What are you selling, or what are people buying and interested in when they enter into business with Mashable?
So when you're a marketer, you're really thinking of a couple of things. There's an equation there, right? You're thinking in terms of the ROI you need on your marketing dollar, but you're also thinking in terms of the equation of the environment and the platform, and you're thinking of what those platforms say about my brand. And what Mashable, I believe, says about a brand when they're marketing there is I'm connected in this universe with young people, with people who want to know what's new and what's next. I want to reach them. I want to be sharing with them. And Mashable's audience is very organically built, right? We are not a site that goes out and does quizzes to sort of rope people into coming on our site. Our site is very much about delivering value for readers, and in doing that has helped the audience really grow very rapidly, particularly from social media. And so for brands, they're coming to be with an audience that really wants to be there and wants to spend time with this content and wants to share the content and takes ownership of it. And so I, in many ways, view our audience more as a movement and as a community than I do as just another audience to sell. And so that's been really key. What we're selling from a marketing point of view, both in display advertising is a very large part of our business. We have a technology called Lift that actually helps advertisers who want to amplify their social assets to actually place those on our site in a very well identified way and amplify their social assets. That's a growing piece of our business. And then of course we work in the branded content space as well, which has been really successful. And I think a lot of that is because we're extremely transparent about what we do.
Well, that leads me to, you've become something of a crusader and known to others by your crusade to stop the term native advertising.
Yes, you'll notice I said branded content.
I noticed that. Very good. You staying on message. So what's wrong with native advertising, and maybe talk a little bit about what branded content is, because not everybody quite understands maybe what it is, and why isn't it native advertising?
Well, so there's nothing wrong with branded content or what you're calling native advertising. My problem is with the word native when used in the marketing context. And my reason for that is I don't think that anyone really knows what it means. Whereas if I say to you that a brand is going to speak to you on my site, we do this crazy thing of calling it a brand speak, and we put a big logo at the top that says a brand is speaking to you. Branded content, or content where a brand is actually putting a message out as an article, a video, an infographic, what have you, is nothing new, right? The Texaco Star Theater was branded content, right? So we're talking about the 1950s. Any advertorial type content that you saw in magazines is branded content. In fact, I would say the magazine world, even when it's not identified as branded content, is often branded content. I would challenge you to go into a fashion magazine and see an article in one of the major ones that doesn't often happen to relate to an ad that's also in that book. I think that's the standard and understood in a lot of the fashion industry magazines, and I used to run one, so I understand that. What we do in terms of branded content is give brands the opportunity to speak directly to our audience, but only if they're doing two things. One, they're delivering value to our readers, and two, and these are both requirements, that's not an either or, they must fully identify the fact up front and at the back that they are speaking as a brand and not through one of our journalists. We refuse to let one of our journalists speak for a brand, but we do often help brands amplify their message, and we'll even help them put together the story, but it's going to be very clearly stated as being from that brand itself. And that's okay, right? A brand should be able to talk to me. If I open some of the most esteemed publications on earth, or some of the best websites on earth, brands are often speaking to me. It's just a matter of disclosure and transparency. I don't think there's an industry standard for that yet. I think there should be, and I think we're leading the way.
And are you almost acting, is there a part of your business where you feel you're almost like an agency, that in that role that you're an advisor, you're a counselor, a guide in a sense about creating helping somebody with their messaging?
Sure. What we are great at is telling stories. And so we're not the only publisher to claim that, certainly. But I think we are an expert at telling social stories that take off online and in social media in particular. There's a reason why Mashable, this relatively small company, right? We're about 150 people, is the #1 most shared media brand on Twitter and on LinkedIn. And so you have media brands out there in the globe who are 20,000, 30,000, 50,000 people, and yet somehow they're not able to get the traction in social media that this little engine that could down on 16th Street. And so I think this is what we're really great at, and so we help brands to amplify messages. So yes, we have a creative services team that will help brands to do that. That in no way crosses the line ever with our newsroom. It helps brands to understand our storytelling tools, and we love that opportunity. And I think that's when really we're at our best, is when we're listening to a brand and we're briefed for them. We're glad to have them run display media with us. We know that it works, and it works very well, and it works at scale. But when you can help people tell their story well, why not use every tool in your arsenal?
We'd love to get your opinion on sort of in terms of the broader trends of the advertising business, and so much of a focus now, sort of at least as you read about it, is programmatic advertising,
sure,
right? Where is programmatic going? And do we get, I'll tell a tale out of school, which is the two of us met at smoking cigars at an advertising industry event, and that's about it.
And now I'm outed.
Right, and now you're outed. That's it,
Second time in my life.
Right, and bada bing. And in a world of programmatic advertising, is the human element of sales going away, or is everything we just feed the numbers and grind it out? I'm presenting the most extreme scenario, but is that the case, and why isn't that the case?
Well, I think I'll knock on wood here, but I don't think sales jobs are going away anytime soon in the media business.
All right.
As a fan of Mad Men and as a fan of my own house, I hope that's not the case. But what I do think is happening is really programmatic too, right? And so a lot of people don't know what programmatic advertising is at all, so let's back up a little bit. Right? Programmatic advertising started really as a way to buy media in the same way really that we buy travel right now, right? If you think of it, an advertiser can go online, or their agency can go online, use a service with a menu of options, and actually purchase advertising across a wide network of options. And they upload their material, and it runs as long as the publisher is roped into that system, the way OpenTable works or anything else, any other kind of automated sort of scale buying and reservation. Now what I think is happening is a new generation of programmatic that's much more powerful for all of us, because the original version was very much about downward auctions, right? And if you think about when programmatic was on the rise, it was probably around 2008 that we saw the first rise. And what else was happening at that point? It was the absolute collapse of the American economy, right? And so At that point, downward spirals of pricing made sense. But now the economy is strong. Now people understand digital marketing in a way they haven't in the past. And what we're seeing as sort of the next generation of programmatic is what's called PMP, or private marketplace, where buyers are actually able to, through a human connection, come to an arrangement, but then process the buy using digital technology so that there isn't the possibility for error in hand-to-hand transfer of digital files or of targeting, insertion orders on paper, that sort of thing, any kind of contracts. Everything is done digitally, and that makes sense to me. But we'll still need human beings to tell the story of those sites. We'll still need human beings to make the smart decisions for brands. If anything, I think brands need agencies more than they ever have before, because there is so much data to boil and to understand. And I like to say that we're in a golden age of innovation, but a stone age of data. And really, we don't understand all this data that we have. Now, through programmatic, people can use data to demographically target the audience they want, right? To geographically target, to psychographically target the audience that they want. But the most important thing is understanding the environment where my brand is going to be, right? My brand, as a marketer, is my faith. It's my contract of faith with my consumer. The last thing I'm going to do is buy it blindly and just put it out there, because who knows what site it can wind up on. So I want to make sure that I have direct connections and direct accountability.
And so are you fearful that as people find it easier in a technological way to buy an audience that's a little bit in a lot of different places, right? That as the publisher, you get lost in that, and that the brands are trying to commoditize you in a sense. Well, you're just one of a bunch of places where I buy this audience, and if you are seeing that, or if that's some of the pushback, what do you do?
Yeah, and there will be brands who will do that, right? Yeah. There will be brands who care about nothing about who they reach, right? Let's say they're direct response advertisers who have simply done the math of, I need to show this toothbrush, this electric toothbrush that I sell 3 in the morning on TV. I need to show that same toothbrush to X millions of people to get X thousands of sales, and I make my number. There will always be people who buy scale, there always have been. Yep. But if you're a smart marketer, you want to know exactly where your brand is going, and you're willing to pay a little bit more for that. If you think really the travel business is the best analogy, right? The travel business right now, I don't go online and think that I'm going to spend the same to put my head on a pillow at a flea bag hotel as I do at the Four Seasons. Right. I know I'll spend more. Why? Yeah. Because I'm getting a better experience. I'm getting a better return for my investment, in essence. And as a marketer, it's the same thing. In both cases, theoretically, I will go to sleep, right? And I will wake up in the morning. I think I'll feel a lot better for myself and my brand if I wake up at the Four Seasons. And so there are options all along the pricing scale for that for marketers. And I think marketers are seeing the same.
I want to ask you about another area where Mashable, I think, is doing some really interesting stuff, which is, call it technological innovation, and specifically around your velocity, call it a product, service, application. Talk a bit about that, what velocity is, how you use it, and maybe how others are using it now.
Sure. So velocity is a technology that was built at Mashable. It's completely proprietary. Our chief technological officer, Robin Peterson, had worked in the past for NBC, and previous before that for a small dial-up internet company years ago that had been funded by an algorithmic trading company. So it was his learning space, if you will, to understand that people use mathematical algorithms to understand how they could forecast and predict fluctuations of the dollar. When he got to Mashable, he saw that our editors were spending all day, every day, trying to use their own brain power to forecast what would go viral, what would be the next thing that should be covered, what was going to be hot in social media next, because again, that's very much our currency. Right. And so he decided to assign a currency.
And trending, as you said, sort of isn't good enough.
No, by the time it's trending, why would you cover it?
Right. A lot of people think that's you got to see what's trending.
No, and there's a lot of hucksterism out there in the business right now. In the marketing business, there are people who will say, if you pay me $20 more per thousand, I will put you next to all my trending stories. Well, thank you very much. You're going to charge me extra to reach the least influential people possible? Fantastic. I'd be better off putting it all in a slot machine, I'm pretty sure. But what Robin was able to see is that you could assign a currency value to every piece of content that we could find. And so the velocity system began, it was something built in-house. We now have servers around the world that are crawling the web. We crawl about 130 million URLs. And we assign a currency value, the system does, to virtually every piece of content that the system sees, and then is able to forecast using the same sort of algorithmic model with some tweaks, of course, to forecast how that story will be shared. What is the time arc of that sharing? So if I see a story today that has 5 shares, Velocity can forecast that story will have 1,302 shares. It's going to take about 3 hours for that to happen, and here's the average shares per minute to make that happen, and where the fluctuations will be. The system is remarkably precise, and it has helped our newsroom to get a leg up in terms of understanding, because we can be 8, sometimes 10 hours ahead of the trend. And so knowing 8 or 10 hours before your competition will see a story and giving you that time to respond or be creative or to post or choose not to is a real clear competitive advantage using data in a smart way that adds to your functionality. And so we use that on the site right now. If you go on the site and you see stories move to the right and get larger on our homepage, that's not because those stories have been shared more. It's because they're actually being forecast to be shared more. And so that's how it affects our own content, as well as our newsroom being powered in some ways by the data. Of course, it's human beings making all decisions. It's just another trigger, another sense and tool for them. Where we think there's a bigger opportunity now is for brands to have access to that. And so that's something we're experimenting with right now. Imagine if, as a brand, you could know 8 hours before your competition that there was going to be a social media story about your product, or about an area that you want to be connected with. Let's say you really want to be connected to Hollywood or to a certain actress, or be tied to a certain subject matter or sport. Knowing 8 hours before everyone else what's going to be talked about is a real competitive advantage in the world of real-time marketing. And so we're seeing now brands experiment and agencies experiment with that with great success.
It strikes me, I don't know if you've had any conversations about this, is the political world at all interested in what you're doing? It seems that's an interesting, looking ahead at what has become, what might become more interesting, or or move from especially as you get close to the end of political campaigns, and things are changing very quickly.
Sure, I mean, we certainly use it to understand what social media is out there about candidates, so that our newsroom can make decisions. But we've never been approached by a political campaign.
I've just created a new revenue stream.
Thank you very much.
Live here at Columbia Business School.
That's amazing.
Yeah, incredible.
And I get to keep the cup, which is fantastic. Thank you.
It's very great. There is more and more people are interacting digitally in a mobile environment, right?
Yes.
Not sitting at their computer, not at home. They're mobile. How is that affecting what you do, both from a content and a sales perspective? What does that mean?
Sure, it's in the core of what we do. So Mashable is designed with complete responsive design elements. So the entire site remakes itself to your device. In fact, in the last month, we were hit by over 5,000 different device profiles from around the planet. If you keep in mind all of the phones that are in existence, all the tablets that are in existence, each one of them in different generations and different generations of operating systems and the like. 5,000 different devices hitting our server. It would be madness to try to create 5,000 different sites to fit them. So very wisely, we were one of the first sites ever to be built with completely responsive design. And that allows the site to dynamically reshape and reform itself to your device. Even if you pinch and pull it on your device, the site will reshape itself to that moment. The same goes for the advertising. And so we encourage advertisers to work with us to create responsive creative. Some do it on their own. Often we do it for them, and we're happy to do that. We see good response rates when advertisers are able to work that way, and so we encourage that. More than half of our audience at this point is accessing us through mobile devices, and I think that's going to be true for most sites, but particularly ones like ours that are so focused on youth and innovation and what's next. It makes sense that those devices will become so much a part of the way that people access us. I also think we'll come to a moment where more people are skipping the computer purchase overall and are simply going straight to the device. And so that is their computer. That is their everyday. And I think we're seeing that now as phones get larger and tablets get smaller. It will be a question of how many devices do I really need?
Well, now that you've killed our shot at getting Dell to sponsor this program, with that, I will say, Seth, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you for joining us this evening on CITI Media Reporter. Good night.